Hey guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Vish and welcome to my best and surprising books of 2022. I am so excited to go through these books that I absolutely loved. To be honest, I thought I was going to struggle putting together 10 books for my best books of the year, but I didn't struggle, which is really great because I didn't think I read a lot of good books this year. Last year, because I feel like everyone's been struggling to create their best books list, and I thought I would struggle too. I do have a couple best books of all time which we will go through in the video, but just before we start, I just want to ask you guys, what do you think my best book of 2022 is? Because I've created a top 3. The rest is not ranked, but there is a number 3, number 2, and number 1 spot. But I want to know what you think the number 1 spot is, because I am very surprised what is at the number 1 spot. So let's get into my surprising books first before we get into the best books. Alright, my first surprising book of 2022 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. So, if you know, Emily Henry wrote People We Meet on Vacation, which I did not like. It was, I think, one of my worst books for 2021, I believe. And that's why this is surprising, because I gave this 5 stars. It is not part of my best books of the year because I didn't love it as much as the other books that are on the best list, if you know what I mean, because, you know, there's different 5 stars, right? I sadly read this first and then moved on to Spanish Love Deception. So this one I thought was one of my best romances of the year until, you know, I read other romances. So I still gave this 5 stars because I really connected with our main character, January. That's right, I read this in January as well. Anyway, this follows our main character, January, who is going through a bout of grief because she just lost her father, and her father had secrets, and she is trying to escape her real life. So she goes to this beach house that is her father's to pack up his things and also to have some quiet time to write her book that has a deadline. And next to her beach house is August, I believe. Is it August? Or Gus, who lives next door to her beach house, who is also her rival in college. And he writes literary fiction, historical fiction, whereas she writes romance books. And these two, I guess, frown upon each other's genres, so they make a bet to write the other person's genre by this deadline, and the person that sells most books will win the bet. You know, it was a really good romance. I enjoyed these two characters and their chemistry and their banter. I also really enjoyed the talk of grief in this a lot because, again, our character is going through grief, and our character, I related to her a lot because she's the type of girl that romanticizes life, and she criticizes herself sometimes for romanticizing her life because it creates certain expectations in your head for what should happen. And I do that all the time, and that's why I relate to her. But we, as people, me, January, we still continue to romanticize life because it gives us a happier outlook on our own lives, and it just creates more hope for us in our hearts and in our head. So I just really enjoyed Beach Read, and I also read Book Lovers, I think, this year. I didn't enjoy it as much as Beach Read, but I liked it even more than People We Meet on Vacation, but this is my favorite of Emily Henry's novels. The next surprising book I read was Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. Oh, I have notes. So I gave this book 4.25 stars. This is a literary fiction mystery book. It follows our main character, Inti, and this takes place in Scotland. And Inti is a part of a project where they rehabilitate wolves in the Scottish Highlands. She's getting a lot of flack from the townspeople in the Scottish Highlands that them rehabilitating wolves will impact negatively on their farms and so on and so forth. But it is good for the Scottish Highlands and the environment to reintroduce these wolves into the forests. So it's just a journey of Indy doing this and journey of the wolves rehabilitating into these forests, and the the villagers coming to terms with this and realizing it's not so bad. But there's also a sense of tension between the wolves and the farmers, because the farmers have declared that if they see a wolf on their property, they will shoot the wolf because they're just protecting their livestock. So I just was so mesmerized by this story, the writing style, the atmosphere, and of course the wolves. That was the main thing for me in this. I didn't expect to love this as much as I did. I loved our main character as well because she was so adamant in protecting the wolves, and she sees herself. Her spirit, her attitude reflects that of a wolf, of a wolf's spirit and attitude. And I absolutely loved that. And we also go through her backstory, trigger warnings for sexual abuse, domestic sexual abuse. And there is a romance in here as well, but it's not overpowering. It was just there in the background, but I still really enjoyed the romance in this. It was very touching. It was cute. And the ending, I was not a fan of, because I actually gave this 4.25 stars because of that ending, because I won't spoil anything, but our main character had this idea and purpose and ambition in her life, but I feel like with the ending it contradicted what she stood up for. If you read the book, you know what I mean. So I didn't expect that to happen in the end, so I wasn't as much in love with this book because of the ending, but I still was very, very surprised at how much I loved this book. I would highly recommend this book if you want that spellbinding atmosphere. And of course the wolves, we learned so much about wolves and their mentality and their pack mentality. It was very informative, which is also another surprising thing. So if you're really into that, I highly recommend this book as well. The next book I want to talk about is The Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So this is the last book I read for 2022. So this is why you don't do your best books of the year before 2022 ends, because you'll never know if the last books you read in 2022 will be on your best books list. So Ninth House is in my surprising and not best because I don't have the best track record when it comes to Leigh Bardugo. So I read the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I liked the first book but absolutely despised the second book, and I even tried to start the third book because I was like, I really want to know, but I don't want to know because I'm scarred. So I DNF'd the third book as well. So I have not read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom because I am literally scarred by Shadow and Bone, but I thought I'd give Ninth House a try. This was one of my Patreon green bone pick for one of the months, and I tried it and I really liked Ninth House. It's so different from the whole Grishaverse writing style. This is an adult fantasy book that is dark academia for sure because it takes place in Yale, and it's about our main character Alex, who is recruited to the Ninth House, and the Ninth House is another secret society in Yale that really polices other secret societies to make sure that they're not doing anything, not illegal, but not doing anything fatal to the people who are not in the secret societies. And one day Alex finds out a townie was murdered, and she suspects that one of the secret societies were behind it. So she tries to find out which one did it. There's also another mystery involved that I won't say just because it's a spoiler, that connects with the murder as well, and I just really like how they interconnect and interweave with each other to the end. It is a very dark book. There is a trigger warning for sexual abuse in here, I believe. Yes, also a lot of drug abuse and death. Oh, and I forgot the most important thing. Our main character was recruited to the Ninth House because she can see ghosts, spirits, and that is not a trait that comes around very often. So her ability to see spirits is why she was recruited to the Ninth House, because again, by policing the rituals that the secret societies do, she monitors the spirits and prevents them from disturbing these rituals, because if they do, catastrophic things happen. So I really enjoyed the writing style in this. The atmosphere was really great. I enjoyed the mystery a lot. I didn't predict any of it really. I just was along for the ride and I really, really enjoyed it. I was very surprised. I gave this 4.5 stars. It wasn't obviously my favorite. If not, I would give it 5 stars, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. I am so glad I read this, and obviously Hellbent is now out and I will dive into this. Also, the reason why I don't have this book is because my mom has borrowed it so she can reread Ninth House to read Hellbent, which she has now, so she can read it before I do, which is totally fine. So I am very excited to dive into Hellbent to see how everything will play out, because the way Ninth House ended was sort of a cliffhanger, and I'm so glad I didn't read it 4 years ago. I'm so sorry to everyone who did, but I'm very excited to see what Hellbent will bring. I feel like it will be a wild ride. I just hope that the writing in Ninth House continues and Leigh Bardugo doesn't write the way she wrote the Grishaverse. I can't explain it very well, but you know what I mean. Alright, and the last surprising book I want to talk about is Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, a non-fiction, which is surprising in itself. So I gave this 4.5 stars as well. It is Matthew McConaughey's memoir, and I listened to the audiobook in tandem with reading Green Lights. The reason why it's unsurprising, because again, I didn't think I would really like this book as much as I did. There's a lot of life lessons that he had in here that I took to heart and tried to like learn from it, even though it wasn't really a self-help book. It was just him telling the tale of his life and everything that he learned, and his life is a very wild life. He's experienced a lot of things, done a lot of things, but I just found his life fascinating, and I didn't expect to learn a lot from this book. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this. There's not much I can say except it was very surprising how much I like this book, and he does a really good job narrating his own story because it's told in like mixed media and everything, like pictures, little sticky notes from his journal and everything like that. It was a really great reading experience. I highly recommend the audiobook as well. Alrighty, let's go through my best books of 2022. So the next 7 books are in no particular order. I'm just gonna go through them and then we'll get to the top 3. Okay, so the first book I want to talk about is Radiance by Grace Draven. So if you've seen my worst books of 2022, I'll link it. The second book to this series, Eidolon, was in my worst book. However, the first book, Radiance, is now in my best books of the year. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. It is such a warm, cozy hug, and it is a great friends to lovers romance. It's also kind of a monster romance because look at him. So this is an adult fantasy romance series, and I picked this up in January, and it's about these 2 characters. She is from a human kingdom, whereas he is from a Kai kingdom. He's a prince of Kai, and they are forced to be married to make an allegiance, and these 2 find each other repulsive in terms of physically because they both look very different, but they create and bond a new friendship with each other, and it's so sweet, and obviously eventually they become lovers, which is also so sweet. I loved this book so much. I feel like this is the best friends to lovers romance that I've ever read, and there is another book in here that is also friends to lovers, but this to me is still my favorite friends to lovers romance. And there is a fantasy plot in here because she is being attacked because of this allegiance, and the main fantasy plot is kind of thrown in there literally in the epilogue, which I did not like, but because it was literally right at the end, it didn't hinder my reading enjoyment. But again, that's why the second book is in my worst list, because of that. So yeah, I absolutely love this book. I really want to reread it and experience their romance again, and I highly recommend this particular one and not the rest of the series, just this particular book. And if you just ignore that little fantasy plot thrown in at the end, it could really just stand on its own. So yeah, I highly recommend The Radiance by Grace Draven. Next book I want to talk about is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I feel like this book is on a lot of people's best books of 2022. This is an adult fantasy novel that is high fantasy but low stakes, which is very true. I describe this as just vibes, no plot, because we follow our main character Viv, who is an orc. She has retired her mercenary days and just wants to settle down and open a coffee shop. And in this town, no one knows what coffee is. So Viv builds this coffee shop and lets everyone experience the love and smell of coffee and the atmosphere of a cafe and pastries. It is such a great cozy fantasy book. It is like a warm hug. There is a romance in here, but it's a very slow burn romance, and it's not the forefront of this book. And I don't want anyone having an expectation of like, oh my god, it's a sapphic romance. It is, but it's not the focus of this book. It is very tiny amount in here. You can see it building. It's a very slow burn, but it's not the main focus. It made me appreciate the atmosphere of a cafe and just the little things in life, because it's really cool to see see people experiencing these things for the first time, and we've taken it for granted because we've experienced this for so long now. We just know what coffee is, we just know what pastries are, but we don't take the time to really appreciate what these things are. You can see it being done in here, especially the pastries. I absolutely love chocolate croissants. Chocolate croissants are my favorite thing in the entire, well, one of my favorite things in the entire world. I absolutely love this book. I would definitely reread it again, especially with the audiobook, because the author narrates it as well, and I really want to get a special edition of this. I know Fairy Lee is doing one, and I hope to get that edition. I know Broken Binding has done a pretty one as well, but I think I missed out, so that's fine. And if you didn't guess, I gave this 5 stars. The next one I want to talk about, I don't have because I actually lent it out to my cousins, which is Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Suntanto, and I gave this 5 stars. This is a adult mystery comedy mystery book that I absolutely loved. I gave it to my cousins to read because I know they will love it as much as I did. So this is basically for our main character, Lena, I think. I'm very bad with names. We follow a main character who is in business with her mother and her aunties, and they basically have a business for weddings. So each person has a designated task during a wedding. So our main character does photography, her mom does hairdressing, each auntie does a separate thing like baking, etc. So our main character and her mom and her aunties are basically Chinese Indo descent, and they're living in America. And I am a Indian Malaysian, and the language Bahasa Malaysia in Malaysia is also very similar to Bahasa Indonesia. They're very similar, they're just 2 different dialects. So a lot of things that happened in this book, there's a lot of phrases in Bahasa Indonesia that was in there, and the way her mom and her aunties acted just reminds me so much of my grandmother and her sisters, because my grandma has 7 siblings and most of them are girls. So this book had a lot of nostalgia for me because it just reminded me a lot of home, and just the mannerisms of her and her entire family just reminded me of me and my entire family. So our main character's mom sets her up on a blind date, and our main character goes to this blind date and ends up accidentally killing. So the rest of the book is basically her mom and her aunties trying to find a way to dispose this body while also working at a wedding. This book is hilarious, and I actually do have the second book, which is something 4 Aunties and a Wedding, I think. I cannot wait to read that book one day. But I just absolutely loved this book so much, and the familial relationships in this book. Yeah, this book has a special place in my heart. So I gave this 5 stars. I highly recommend this book, and also the audiobook. And again, because they're Chinese Indo descent, their accents are done well, and phrases are done well in the audiobook. So I highly recommend that one. The next book I want to talk about is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. So I read the whole Brown Sisters trilogy in 2022, and I think this is my favorite of this series just because we have an autistic main character, and anyone who is autistic has a special place in my heart because my little brother is autistic. He's nonverbal, and I just loved this story, and everyone just deserves love in their life, and it just has a special place in my heart. Anyway, we follow our main character Eve and Jacob, and Eve has been jumping between careers for a long time now, and her parents basically told her, you need to find a concrete job or you'll be cut off. And her being upset, she drives and drives, and she eventually reaches this bed and breakfast that Jacob owns, and she sees that they're in need of a chef, and she's like, oh, I can cook. So she goes to an impromptu interview with Jacob, and Jacob is upset with her because she just came in unprepared without a resume or anything like that, and she's just here to interview. However, Jacob and his business partner are desperate for a cook, and his business partner convinces Jacob to let Eve do a trial in the bed and breakfast to prove her skills. By that point, Eva has already left the interview, and Jacob goes to get her, and Eve backs up her car into Jacob, and Jacob is now injured. So Jacob is forced to hire Eve to help him out with his bed and breakfast while he recovers. And it is sort of hate to love because of what happened to Jacob, and Jacob is not pleased with Eve. But Eve is a ball of sunshine and Jacob is a grump. And with Jacob being autistic, he's very much a control freak and a neat freak. He is very blunt with his words. I just really, really loved their love story because they both understand each other so well. That just reminds me of my own relationship. It's just really nice to be seen. If you haven't read the Brown Sisters trilogy, I highly recommend the trilogy. This is my favorite of the series. So you can see from the books that I've talked so far, 2022 was not the year of fantasy for me. I was very much burnt out on fantasy last year, but I did read some fantasy. They just weren't hitting the spot. However, I do have 2 books on this list that are fantasy, so at least you'll get some fantasy content from me. I apologize, there's not much fantasy on this list, but I did read a variety of things, as you can see. So, speaking of fantasy, so my next book I want to talk about is a fantasy book, and that is... Oh, Be Real. One sec. Needs to be taken. Alright, now that the Be Real has been taken, as I was saying, Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd and final book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. And of course, this is an adult fantasy series that I absolutely loved, and it was high time that I finished this trilogy, so I picked up the Hero of Ages in the middle of the year. In this series, or at least in the Final Empire, we follow Vin, who is our main character, and she gets discovered by Kelsier, who is a Mistborn. And in this world, Mistborn is someone who can ingest metals that gives them power. A Misting can only ingest one type of metal that gives them one type of power, whereas a Mistborn can ingest any type of metal that each correlates with a certain power, so they can have all of them. Kelsier, who's a Mistborn, discovers Vin, who is also a Mistborn. And Kelsier is trying to get a ragtag group to overthrow the Dark Lord, who's been ruling the world for the last 100 or 1,000 years. And that is the Final Empire. It grows into a whole different thing for the next 2 books, including this one. And this one had a killer ending. It is one of the most satisfying endings I've ever read, and it's also one of the most bittersweet endings I've ever read. And anyone who's read Sanderson is familiar with the Sanderlanche. This had a massive Sanderlanche that I did not see coming. Sanderson is very good at putting little things throughout the entire series and then connecting them all together at the end, and you just didn't see it coming. At least I didn't see it coming. I know other people have. But I didn't see it coming just because it's so minuscule in each of the books, and then when you put them together and you're like, oh, I did not realize that. Anyway, I just thought this had a really, really good ending, and I love the Mistborn trilogy. I think Hero of Ages is my favorite of this series. Well, Ascension was my favorite, but it is now the 2nd favorite. I'm so glad I finished the trilogy. I need to move on to Era 2. Really, I need to move on to Stormlight. And if you're trying to get into fantasy, I would highly recommend this trilogy. So, the 6th book I want to talk about, I kind of lost count, but I want to talk about Lotus by Jennifer Hartman. This is an adult contemporary romance, I believe, and we follow 2 characters. We follow our main characters, Sydney and Oliver. So, Sydney and Oliver have been best friends since they were a child because they are neighbors. They've grown up together. So, when Oliver and Sydney were, I think, 8, on the 4th of July, Oliver gets kidnapped and everyone has been searching for him for the last 22 years. And suddenly, Oliver turns up again 22 years later, and Sydney's still living in that same house. And basically, we try and find out what happened to Oliver, and also the reconnection between Sydney and Oliver in this story. It is a friends to lovers story. It is a very sweet and heartwarming story, but it's also very, very dark. It has trigger warnings for child kidnapping, child sexual abuse, I guess child manipulation as well. This was a heartwarming book, but also a very, very dark book, and I just really loved the romance between Sydney and Oliver. I especially loved Oliver because him being away for 22 years, he doesn't really have a sense of the modern world, so it's just him trying to also reconnect with the world and trying to understand what a phone is and what it does, you know what I mean? So he was very innocent in this book, and I just wanted to protect him at all costs. There's also a raccoon here that he adopts called called Athena, and it's just so sweet and so weird, and I really, really loved this, and I highly recommend this. I really want to read her other book, Steel Beating, which I just remembered. Some of the characters are actually in Lotus, so it takes place after Steel Beating, I believe. And the 7th book I want to talk about before we get into the top 3 is Lore Olympus, volume 2 and 3, really. So I read these 2 volumes this year because they both came out this year, and I'm pretty sure volume 1 was one of my best books or the best book of the year for 2021. I can't remember, but volume 2 and 3 are also on this list. I love Lore Olympus. I've talked about Lore Olympus on my channel for a while now. It is a webtoon comic that really delves into Hades and Persephone's romance, but also in Greek mythology in general. You have all the other characters in Greek mythology, and you also go through some of their backstories and how their stories interconnect with both Hades and Persephone. It doesn't shy away from the topics that you do associate with Greek mythology, like the doucheness of Zeus, and of course trigger warnings for sexual abuse in this as well. I think I mentioned this quite a few times, but I've binged Lore Olympus in webtoon, and I've stopped binging when it was announced that Rachel Smith was going to release each volume, so I've decided to wait for each volume to come out and read them as well. So I know a lot more than volume 3, which is the recent one. So I know a lot more and what happens after this volume. So I cannot wait to see everyone experience more of the story. And if you haven't read this, I highly recommend this. This is such a great graphic novel series. The art style is absolutely beautiful. The romance between Hades and Persephone is also very beautiful. It's mutual pining. Alrighty, let's go through my top 3 of the year. Coming in the number 3 spot is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armaz. Yeah, this is on the 3rd spot, which is very surprising. At least January 2022 me is really surprised. So if you guessed this as the number 1 spot, I'm sorry to disappoint, but it's not. So, Spanish Love Deception. This is an adult contemporary romance that has taken the internet by storm. I was very skeptical going into this because it is a TikTok recommendation. If you know me, you know what I think about TikTok, so let's not get into that. But this has taken BookTok by storm. It is a BookTok recommendation, and because of that, I was very skeptical. So I tried this because my good friend Abby, thank you so much Abby for gifting this to me, because she absolutely loved it as well. So she gifted me a copy. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed this. So we follow our main character, Catalina. That's where I got the Lena from. That is not the main character's name in Dial for Aunties, is it? Lena is over here, not in Dial for Aunties. I cannot remember her name for the life of me. But anyway, Lena, our main character, recently has gone through a breakup that her family pities her for. She needs to attend a wedding in Spain, and she has told her family she's bringing someone with her because she doesn't want her family to pity her anymore, and especially when she goes to that family gathering, she doesn't want that pity on her. So she says that she's bringing her colleague, Aaron Blackford, who she despises. And they have a little office rivalry going on, which again reminds me of The Hating Game, which is one of my favorite romances of all time. So that aspect is in here. A lot of people say it is literally The Hating Game. Not quite. She says Aaron Blackford is going to be escorting her to the wedding because he offered to take her to the wedding and help her. So that is essentially this love story. It is an enemies to lovers, just like Hating Game. It is not so much an office romance because they do eventually go to Spain. I love this book so much. It gives me so much joy. And of course, Aaron Big Dick Energy Blackford, also one of the loves of my life. I just really, really love the chemistry between these two, the same amount that I love the chemistry between characters in The Hating Game. It's just a really, really fun time. I know a lot of people complain about the size of this book, but because it is a slow burn romance, I appreciated every detail of this romance, and I just really, really want to reread this. But yeah, I don't know if I would recommend this book, to be honest, but if you did love The Hating Game, I would definitely recommend this because of that. And now the top 2 spot of my favorites list is actually really Chloe Leese. Yeah, Chloe Leese's books. Just all of Chloe Leese's books. But for the sake of this video, I have picked my favorite Chloe Lease book. So let's just quickly go through what I mean by Chloe Lease's books. The Bergman Brothers series. I binge read the Bergman Brothers series this year. So thank you so much to Christine for buying me some of these books for my birthday. I really appreciate so much. Thank you for adding to my collection. She's also very much obsessed with Chloe Lease as I am, and I am so glad I read this year. This brings me so much comfort, and I'm going to reread this series for the 6th book that's coming out this year in 2023. And at the end of December, I also read Two Wrongs Make a Right by Chloe Lease, which is a new series that she's writing, which is the Wilmot sisters, and I think there are 3 sisters in this. I really enjoyed this. This is not my favorite of Chloe Lease's, so if I had to pick for the top 2 spot, my favorite is With You Forever by Chloe Lease. So this follows Axel and Rooney, and this is the 4th book in the Bergman Brothers series. So we have Axel Bergman, who is the eldest brother in the Bergman Brothers clan, and we have Rooney, who is best friend to Willa, who is the love interest in the 1st book. This is definitely a Sunshine Grump romance. Axel is also autistic, and I didn't mention Chloe Lease is a disabled author, and all of her books has some kind of disability in her books, and this one we have autism for Axel and IBS, I think, for Rooney. So Axel and Rooney have some sort of tension between them throughout the years, and before this book starts, the Christmas before, Rooney kissed Axel in a game of charades, and they haven't talked about it since. So the way this story starts is that Rooney has a problem, and the only way to solve this problem is by marriage of convenience with Axel, and they both decide to stay at Axel's place, and they basically have to live together under pretenses. So there's a lot of tropes that I love: marriage of convenience, forced proximity, Grump and Sunshine romance, all my favorites, and it amounted to one of my favorite romances of all time. I really love this, and you have a greyhound that is called Harry Styles. It's so cute, and I absolutely love this book. It has so much love, it has so much passion. I will say that once the couple gets together, the story is very rushed. I guess that is one downside of this particular book. Once they both get together, it is very rushed towards the ending, which is one drawback, but because I love the romance so much. Alrighty, and now we've come to my number 1 spot, my best book of 2022. I don't know if you guessed it right or not, but I am as much as surprised as you are that my best book for 2022 is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. This is an adult fantasy novel. Yeah, this is the 2nd fantasy book I was talking about. And this is an adult fantasy novel that I buddy read with Abby and Sam last year. All 3 of us were very surprised at how much we loved this book. I didn't think it would be my number 1 spot, but it has stuck with me for so long because I think I read this in January, and I love this book with all of my heart. It is probably also one of my favorite books of all time. So this has very much a classic fantasy vibe. We follow our main character, Sorsha, who is the youngest child and the only daughter of 7, I believe. And her mother passed away when she was very young, and now a stepmother has come into her family, and her stepmother is kind of a evil witch, I guess, and she wants to get rid of the children so that she can control the husband properly. So she turns Sorsha's brothers into swans. I'm pretty sure it's a retelling of a fairy tale and that I can't quite remember, but if you know, please let me know down below. So the curse that the stepmother, Lady Unog, has created for her brothers, so her brothers have turned into swans. Sorsha is forced to be silent because if she ever uttered a word, her brothers die. So the way the story is told, obviously we're just in Sorsha's head. There's not much dialogue between her and other people, but if she's around other people, you can hear the dialogue. So you're just in her head, and she goes through a lot of things, trigger warnings for sexual abuse, and it's very much an exposition type of narrative because that we're in her head, and I thought I wouldn't like that type of narrative, but because I'm so attached to Sorsha, I did not mind. I was just in her head. I wanted to protect her at all costs. I was rooting for her, and the story was so atmospheric and again spellbinding because of the way Juliette Marillier wrote. If you're a forest girly, if you're a nature girly, this is the book for you. And also if you're a character driven reader, this is the book for you. There is a romance in here that I absolutely loved, and it was so sweet. And yeah, I just highly recommend this book for everyone to read. I haven't continued on with the series because I haven't heard good things about the sequels, but I do want to try it at least. So yeah, this is my best book of 2022 and I absolutely loved it. If you made it to the end of the video, put a swan emoji for A Daughter of the Forest. And let me know what are some of your favorite books or surprising books of the year, and if you've read any of the books that I just mentioned. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to. All my socials and my Patreon is linked down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!